Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, The Tipping Point for Federal Shared Services, sponsored by Ernst & Young on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Roberta Moreau, a principal in the government and public sector practice for Ernst & Young, Cindy Gallagher, a senior vice president for global business services at Discovery Communications, Mark Glorioso, the executive director of NASA's Shared Services Center, Matt Miller, the Assistant Commissioner for Fiscal Accounting at the Bureau of Fiscal Service in the Treasury Department, and Mark Rieger, the Deputy Controller at the Office of Management and Budget. At the very end of that, we get another great conversation, and Cindy, I know you want to jump in to talk about the disruption, and we talked about robotics a little bit, but there's even more to that than just, hey, let's put in a bot. Talk a little bit about what that actually means for the future.
Sure, absolutely. Mark down at the OMB was just mentioning before the break the opportunity to move through things more quickly. And we talk about that all the time in the commercial environment. We talk about the term leapfrogging and how can we leapfrog and use lessons learned to jump over some of the things that maybe needed to happen. And, as you're a baby, you got to take little steps along the way. Once you get to be a teenager and into your 20s, you can skip steps, right? So how do we skip or jump over things more quickly? And I think the federal space has an opportunity to learn from that quite well. And Mark, I think you're doing that, and you're talking and having the ability to use digital labor, use RPA, and how do you take the lessons learned from organizations like mine, not repeat some of our mistakes, but then really focus on the value-added activities that we might have been measuring before that we no longer need to measure.
That's right. And because we're the federal government, we're a bit more risk adverse than you all are.
A bit.
Because our failures tend to be public. I just point out that even in our failures, we make interesting successes. I know there's two federal agencies who have been working together, and a former segment was about them getting a divorce. But in fact, the principal of one of those agencies has acknowledged correctly that he has a process and a system that he would not have had before they sat down and compared notes and came up with ways of doing things. So even in things that in experimentation, you have to have good and bad. Out of every experiment, you hope to move forward. Whether that individual experiment winds up being a success or whether that just tells you things that you don't want to do, that's a very successful outcome. And so we have to figure out how to celebrate our successes more, tell the stories about the good things, tell the stories about the two Data Act pilots, talk about what DHS did get out of that relationship, because there's positive benefits to all these things.
And Mark, I'm here. I'm happy to talk to you whenever you're available.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I know you always love that. Roberta, jump in.
So what Mark and I were talking about, we have to get to a point where again, it's a risk adverse environment and we're worried about the headlines, but how about headlines that say, we tried these 5 different innovations, right? And we made a dramatic difference in the way the federal workforce tackled a certain problem. Like, let's lean into those types of headlines and create that environment.
And I think many times, while it was a joke to Mark, but in all seriousness, it's very difficult to get agencies to talk about what's going well because of that fear of, well, what if it doesn't go as well as we hoped? I don't know if Cindy will bring you in as the oddball on the group here. You don't have that problem, but you are a publicly traded company.
We are a publicly traded company.
So does that also, does the risk aversion happen, or because it's a profit as well piece?
Yeah, it depends on how you market it,
Yeah.
how you spin it, right? How you sell the story. Discovery is we are a fairly conservative company, believe it or not. Our main stakeholders could have a huge impact on the stock price, right? And a huge impact on many people's retirement plans, many people's wallets. For us, that big measuring stick is working capital. And if our working capital and free cash flow components are not doing what the street needs it to do, it's on me. Right, and that has happened. But what we try to do is market and really showcase any small win that we have, right? And if anything looks like it's going in the wrong way, we openly talk about it, and we openly talk about it within the organization. What can we do to pivot it back? How is it going to impact our shareholders? How are we going to get ahead of that message? How can we, if we need to, involve the investor relations team to start having conversations with the big guys on the street before our earnings are released? And the same is true on the win side. If we think that we're going to be favorable to our forecasts, let's start really touting that hard, right, to make sure everybody knows the work that went into it and the good things that could come to them as a result.
And let me bring in Mark from NASA. You guys had a big win, and I want you to talk a little bit about the bot that you guys are using. And I think, Matt, you mentioned it was George Washington.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
Yes.
What's frustrating from a press perspective is, why did I have to wait and hear about it? I think it was 6 to 8 months, a year into it, right? Would love to know about it as soon as you guys got it off the table and saw it was successful. So talk a little bit about what's going on with how you guys are using bots.
We started using this particular bot in accounts payable. We did a process where we looked at a Six Sigma process to try and figure out what are all of the steps we have to do. We identified the things that could be done by a digital workforce. We implemented the software, we ran through, we tested that, and we decided that's it, that's the one. And we put it out there, gave it a badge, gave it an ID number, and got it started. It had such great acclaim across NASA that our CFO started giving us money to go do more of it. So now we've got a team of people at the NSSC who are constantly looking for, how do we do the next bot? How do we put that next time-saving measure, leapfrog a little bit over some of these steps, and get that success? I also wanted to talk a little bit too, though, this risk aversion. We went to the moon. I don't know what y'all sorry. But
We're not as risk averse on mission.
Correct.
We're risk adverse on mission support.
Got it.
You know,
I agree with you.
And Jason,
I was going to make that point.
yeah,
Thank you.
we don't go out and sell the many improvements that we do in mission support every single day. We just don't talk about that stuff. That's backroom. We're supposed to be doing that, and we're supposed to be making that more efficient all the time to direct the resources at the public-facing services that we provide.
So Mark, come back.
Just wanted to say, when we were transferring services in, and as we continue to do that, we have 10 centers. They're all over the country. We have a workforce that's doing this work everywhere. We came upon this concept called badge in place. We keep the people doing the work they were doing. We put them as a centrally located function, let them stay where they are. They're remote employees, telework kind of work, and that has, through attrition, allowed us to skinny down the workforce and get as much of our centralization wins that we can.
Is the workforce a big concern? Maybe Matt, jump in here. As you guys kind of start to look at stuff like robotics and blockchain and automation, is the workforce, well, am I not going to press that button anymore? Am I not going to do my data sheet, my spreadsheet anymore? Is that a concern for you guys, and how are you communicating around it?
Actually, so you do it, communication's key, but it's actually interesting as we start to pilot and look for ways to leverage some of these things, it actually generates an excitement among the workforce when they get to be innovative and try to find ways to do things better. And again, if what we said earlier, if the demand is out there, then the workforce will be fine because there's going to be plenty of demand. It's going to reshape the type of work that they do, but there's going to be plenty of demand to do a much greater body of work much more efficiently.
And Cindy, you were nodding too. What was for Discovery Communications, the reaction from its workforce as you moved down the shared services path?
At first, there was a lot of fear. Right, when I first came in and started talking about robotics and other things, the team was fearful. And then as they started to learn, oh gosh, I actually have the ability to brainstorm, whiteboard, and reshape what I do every day. And that means I don't have to just key buttons, right? I can have conversations with my colleagues, I can have conversations with the business, and I can understand the business strategy more. They became more and more engaged, and we started to call people bot controllers, right? So our AP supervisor, that's part of her title, but she is also the AP bot controller, and then that's part of her everyday job, right? Everyday role and responsibility.
Something that I don't want to let get away, and that was they focus on the customer experience and less on the transaction.
Right.
That's big. I think that's big.
And we did have to do a lot of change management, right? To your point earlier, Jason, on that very point. And Matt, as you were talking about people, to us at Discovery at least, and in the commercial sector, we have to provide new opportunities for our team members to learn, right? How are they going to learn? It is very fearful, but not fearful to everyone, right? Especially if you look at the generational workforce we're in today. Some of the individuals we have, depending mainly on generational actually, they don't want to do this type of work anymore. They want to be engineers. They want to be doing something creative, and giving this element to their everyday work gives them that opportunity to create.
Roberta, jump in here a little bit. When you work with federal agencies and the workforce, I've never heard a federal agency who says, I have too many people. Maybe they exist, I don't know, but I've never talked to an executive who said, if I only had 5 less people, it'd make my job easier. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing from that workforce perspective. How do you handle that kind of change management?
I think people are looking again at yes, we have workforce, but are they working on valuable things? Are they engaged? Do they feel, are they connected with the mission of the agency? Are they bringing innovations? Are they, again, kind of leaning into their work when they come to work? And that's the conversations we have with our clients about, it's not just about headcount, it's about, are you getting the maximum benefit out of your people? Are they excited about what they're doing? Are they innovating? As you think about these bots, I mean, you're actually going to train people to be centers of excellence to drive more innovation. I mean, what we're seeing from a shared services perspective is that's where all the talent's going to end up going. The demand for talent, the understanding digital, being the source of innovation and transformation is really what we want agencies to focus on.
So we've been a fascinating conversation. I think we go another hour, but unfortunately we're just about out of time. But so let me start. We started last time, the beginning of the Mark's side of the table. We're going to start on the other Mark's side of the table. What's the future of shared services? If we have this conversation a year, 2, 3 from now, what's going to be different at NASA?
At NASA, I believe what you'll see is a much greater migration of services. Our 10 centers will come together. They will move more services into that central location. And I think even in a bigger picture, I really believe that the real future of shared services is going to be in that centralized government function that needs to have some agency push. And I think that's coming, 10, 12 years maybe.
10 or 12 years.
I hate to say it, but I think that's it.
We've been talking about this for 10 or 12 years. Cindy, from the private sector perspective, where you see shared services going?
Digital disruption and labor management, right? And labor management, including the bots, including the robots that we put in place. We will continue to expand services. It's happening today. We will continue to move up the value chain and free up the resources of all of our business partners. But the way we do that is through digital disruption.
Now, one thing about a private sector company, unlike the government, which is much bigger, 2.1 million people, contractors are involved. Yeah. Do you ever get to a point where you're done? I mean, I know there's always the modernization piece, but are you ever centralized?
Yeah, great question. And the answer is no,
yeah.
Only because the business is never done. Right? Discovery is going through some major acquisitions right now. Right? With those acquisitions comes new work. With those acquisitions comes new opportunities to expand shared services, look at our global footprint. As we expand beyond the 220 countries and territories that we're in, we'll need to, again, continue to bring in work and look at the cultural differences that each of those opportunities bring.
Right. Matt, talk about Treasury's future.
So I think what won't change is our ardent belief and support for shared services and that bedrock principle that it's standardization and reuse. I think what Treasury is starting to explore is there more than one path to get there to expand adoption? Example, we're in the process of trying to finalize an agreement with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, NRC, to meet a need that they have. They have a modern system hosted in a cloud. They don't need to migrate to our system. They do have a need when it comes to some business and transaction processing services using their system. We think we've got strong value to provide there, so we're going to look to do that. What better way to reduce the cost and the risk and the burden to allow NRC, that CFO Act agency, to kind of dip their toes in the waters and see some of the value that federal shared service providers can provide. And hopefully it will lead to bigger and better things down the road. So are there more ways to get to where we ultimately want to be?
And the example of NRC, I think, is a really important one because it doesn't have to be the big, let's do everything. Hey, we have a modern system, but we could use help. We don't have the skill sets, the people piece. I think that's a great example. Are you seeing more agencies asking about the pieces and parts versus the entire enchilada?
Yeah, there actually are a couple other agencies that are inquiring about similar opportunities.
All right, Roberta, talk a little bit about the future. Where do you guys see it going?
A lot of what we've talked about today, so we talked about analytics and using data to make business-driven decisions through data analytics and visualization. Shared services are going to be able to enable that. Process excellence, the robotics, but also workflow management, digitalization, mobile, collaboration hubs. These are all the innovations that are going to drive not only cost efficiency, but effectiveness and customer service.
Are you seeing with this urgency that we talked about at the beginning, more agencies asking, hey, come meet with us, give us help, or are agencies still kind of hanging back a little bit?
I think many agencies have submitted their reform plan. To be fair, they're looking for the final release to come back from
We're all looking for that, aren't we?
to say, we put in these great plans, we leaned in, we brought you big ideas. Which ones are going to be adopted? So a lot of the conversation we're having, they're excited about their plans, they want to move forward. they're kind of waiting to see, do they have the green light?
All right. Mark, when's that green light coming? And then we'll talk about your vision.
So,
Soon.
you know, if you think about it, we're in the 19 budget cycle. Agencies' strategic plans, their new objectives, their ERM plans around enterprise risk management are all due this spring. And so I'm hoping and expecting you'll see a lot of this baked into those processes as we come into spring. I mean, clearly we have a pretty evolutionary, maybe bordering on revolutionary change. The nice part, Jason, is some of us have been screaming about this for many years. In this point, we have this groundswell of the agency people who say, if you want to move forward, we need more of this. And so if we can encourage those people and actually perform for them, we will get a big change.
And one of the things that's happening in Congress is the Modernizing Government Technology Act. I know it's a technology piece, but it's going to create a working capital fund at each agency. I know, Mark, you can't necessarily talk about the legislation itself, but the missing piece I've seen over the last decade plus is the money piece, right? Working capital funds, or how to increase it. Does that give you even more hope that you have now Congress, in a sense, is buying into this broader concept?
Well, to the extent that all the parties involved, the agencies, Congress, the commercial world, all can come together towards solutions to some of those outstanding problems would be really good. You know, if we can get all these parties to participate, we'll have the pieces that we can use together to get there.
All right, excellent. This is a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, though, we are out of time, so maybe we can do this again another time. I'd like to thank my guests, Roberta Moreau, a principal in the government and public sector practice for Ernst & Young, Cindy Gallagher, a senior vice president for global business services at Discovery Communications, Mark Glorioso, the executive director of NASA's Shared Services Center, Matt Miller, the assistant commissioner for fiscal accounting at the Bureau of Fiscal Service at the Treasury Department, and Mark Rieger, the deputy controller at the Office of Management and Budget. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the panel discussion, The Tipping Point for Federal Shared Services, sponsored by Ernst & Young on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I've been your host, Jason Miller. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com and search Ernst & Young.
On behalf of Ernst & Young, thank you for joining us. A link to the archive session will be sent to you shortly. If you requested a training certificate, you will also receive an email with download instructions after the webinar. This concludes our discussion. Thank you.